our presenters, Stephanie Coleman and Sean Swindler. So Stephanie Coleman is an autism family educator with the Kansas LEND program through the University of Kansas Medical Center, and Sean is the Director of Community Program Development for the Kansas Center for Autism Research and Training, and he also serves as the Project Manager for the Kansas University Center on Developmental Disabilities. So I will pass it on to them. Thank you all for joining us, and I think I'll pass it over to you, Sean.
Well, I'm Sean Swindler, and the other part of my introduction that wasn't on the screen is that I'm also the parent of a 23-year-old with autism and intellectual disability. We'll talk about my son in a moment, and I'll turn it over to Stephanie to introduce herself.
Yeah, Sean, will you just go ahead and go to the next slide, and that way I can introduce it all.
Yeah.
Sure. So I am Stephanie Coleman. Yes, I am the autism family educator at the Kansas LEND program, but I am also Matthew John's mom. And that's the proudest position I wear, even though he is currently 28 years old. I will never give up enjoying that position. He is a college graduate. He went to the University of the Ozarks and graduated with a bachelor's degree in communications. He is a voter. He became a licensed driver at the age of 23. He aspires to be a cameraman for his beloved Kansas City Royals at some point. And he is an athlete, plays several sports, and much like all of your children, he's a typical young adult who just happens to be autistic, and he makes me proud every day. Our family motto has always been, "Don't tell me it's impossible until after I'm finished." As you can see, he, milestones took time for him in all of the transitions. At 16, he wanted to become a licensed driver, but once he got that permit, he didn't care to practice. And then he decided at the age of 22, he wanted to do that again. So he finally became a driver. And then college graduate. He was 27 when he graduated college. So again, that took several years, but milestones do happen. So.
And so well, I'm Sean Swindler, and I'm parent of Isaac Swindler. He's 23 years old. He right now works 15 to 20 hours a week in a nursing home. Received 18 to 21 services through school where he got to do a lot of job exploration. He receives supplemental security income and is on the STEPS program, both of which we're going to talk about tonight. He's also on the IDD waiver waiting list, which we'll also talk about tonight, and enjoys collecting Disney, Pixar, and Cartoon Network action figures. And he's never going to drive, unfortunately. But the reason we're kind of introducing ourselves as parents, because Stephanie and I have both been there, and a lot of the things we're going to be talking about, which are a lot of different systems that are really difficult to navigate and have a lot of acronyms and take a huge learning curve for everybody. We're going to try to relate them to our own experience so that you can see, how those apply to individual, and we certainly would be happy to take your chat questions or other questions as well throughout.
Before we do get started, I just want to let anybody know, while this is all going to be Kansas specific, I don't know if there's anybody here from another state that might have gotten our email and wanted to be on here, but everything we talk about here, again, it's going to be Kansas specific. However, all of these services are the same in almost every state. They just may look a little different when we talk about waivers.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So we come here talking about transition, and you say, what is transition? Well, life is full of transitions. It's between school to work. It's between jobs. It's working to retirement. It's when you're a preschool kid and you go to kindergarten and all of a sudden you're in kindergarten. Life is full of transitions. And the really cool thing about that is everybody transitions. Everybody experiences transition. Every child transitions to adulthood, whether they have a disability or not. So it's really the thing that everybody has in common. Again, whether you have that disability or not, as we talk about transition. The difference is that our kids with disabilities might need a little bit more support than other kids to do some of those activities that other kids take for granted. I want to get my first job. Well, there are ways to help people get their first job. I want to live independently. I don't want to live with my mom and dad forever. I want to live in my own apartment. There are ways to help support people to do that. So it's not just mom and dad and family continually supporting people. So we start with school transition services, and what school transition services are a part of IDEA, and they are transition services that are intended to prepare students to move from the world of school to the world of adulthood. And in the actual IDEA law, it says that the purpose of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, special education, is to prepare kids for further education, employment, and independent living. And that transition services that are a part of the IDEA are a mandated part of special education, are there to facilitate a child's movement from school to post-school activities. And it specifically calls out continued education, post-secondary education, employment, independent living, and that schools need to do this based on the individual child's needs, their strengths, preferences, and interests. And even more, special education specifies, the law specifies that this includes instruction, related services, community experiences, post-school employment, adult living outcomes, all of these things that go into making a whole, complete life are part of the actual special education law that everybody who receives special education experiences. So the cool part about special education, unlike just about anything else, special education is a legal entitlement. It is your right. It is your civil right to have a child receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. It's your child's civil right to receive appropriate special education transition services. And sometimes our transition services don't get the same amount of attention or funding that other services get as well. So they require a little bit more advocacy, but you're backed up by the law, by the federal statute under IDEA, that this is what needs to be included in your child's transition. And the state law, the state regulations that interpret transition also say these same things, that school districts really need to support kids to transition to their next, where they're going next if they have an IEP. So we're gonna, and I will say that if doing a webinar on advocating for your child's appropriate transition services, it's an entire other webinar. And I definitely urge you, I'm Leah Holly at Families Together. They do some wonderful transition related workshops all over the state, and to definitely check those out because they will go into detail about some of those things that we need to be advocating for as a part of special education for our kids. The next thing, we're just going to have this transition checklist. We're just going to go through some of the things that are important as your child turns 18 and your child's transitions and things that are really important to hit first off. So those are going to be working with Social Security to apply for supplemental security income, VR to apply for vocational rehabilitation, which helps people get and keep jobs, and then the home and community-based services, intellectual and developmental disabilities waiver, which is also really important support and a little bit complicated because there's a waiting list. So the basic for SSI, if I have a disability, a lifelong disability that manifested before I was 22 years old, I might be eligible for supplemental security income. And what that basically says is monthly payments for people who meet eligibility. Most people with intellectual disabilities qualify. Some people, but not all people with autism qualify, and people with many other types of disabilities like traumatic brain injury, physical disabilities can qualify as well. Also, pretty much becoming eligible, determined eligible for SSI by the federal government is your gateway to Medicaid. So the state of Kansas is going to give you, say you're eligible for Medicaid if you are eligible for SSI. States who have expanded Medicaid, where for adults, they allow people who make under a certain amount of money to get Medicaid. have some different rules. Kansas is one of 10 states that has not yet expanded Medicaid. So really, as an adult, the only way you can access Medicaid is through that disability determination. So this really has two roles. It's to get that monthly payment, which is really important, but also to help you access Medicaid, which is so important. If your child has a disability, they likely have medications or might need to go to the doctor, might have other things that need to be maintained, and it provides them access to health care that they wouldn't otherwise have. And so basically prior to age 18, when you apply for your child has a disability and you apply for this disability determination, they will look at your family income. And so if your family income is above a very pretty low threshold, your child's not going to be eligible for SSI, and you're not going to apply. So that means that as soon as they turn 18, the day they turn 18, all of a sudden we count their income and not the family income, not the household income, it's their income. So at age 18, your child who likely qualifies has $0 in income, and you can actually apply for SSI. So the challenge with this, like so many services, is the application process is really complex. It requires you to get some pretty significant documentation of your child's disability, so that if they were diagnosed with autism or IDD at age 4, sometimes you have to get another diagnosis or an updated letter from a doctor saying, yeah, they still have autism, they still have IDD when they're 17. Sometimes kids who don't have a specific intellectual disability, if I have Down syndrome or Fragile X or a genetic disorder, or I can point to a really significant intellectual disability, I'm probably going to qualify pretty easily. If I have autism and I have a lot of splinter skills and I do really good over here and not so good over here, sometimes it's harder to document why that person may qualify. So it takes a lot more time and documentation. But what essentially happens is when your child turns 18, applying for that SSI, and that's going to get them A, access to Medicaid when they qualify, and B, access to supplemental security income, which is about $950 a month, which is wonderfully helpful. And yes, kids who are on SSI can work, and it's beneficial for them to work, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The other really cool thing is it used to be when you were on SSI, there still is a very low limit for the amount of assets you can maintain, which is $2,000. That's almost impossible given how big rents are, given how expensive things are these days to manage in an account. We now have something called ABLE accounts, which lets you essentially save your money so that you don't have to meet that same eligibility for $2,000. And it's a huge win for people on SSI. I'm giving you, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, and then I'll share.
So the challenge with this, we're giving you a very quick run through. There is a 3-hour presentation that could be done on applying for Social Security disability. So we're trying to tell you what you need to know, and then there's a deeper dive. That's a deeper dive.
But I will say, if you apply for SSI for your child and you get denied, immediately appeal. As Sean mentioned, there's so much documentation that's required that sometimes you've missed a document and they've denied it because of that missing document. They may not say that's the reason, but if you appeal, you'll find out that that's that reason. And so what will happen then is, let's say you applied today and you found out in 2 months from now you get denied, you appeal it, and you find out in October that you do get approved because you've finished sending in all the required materials. They will send you a check for all of that back pay from today through whatever day that comes. So it may be 5 or 6 months worth. And just so you know, again, Sean kind of said that we could do a deeper dive on SSI, but I will say, you go, oh, well, that's like $5,000. That's going to be over the $2,000 limit. There is an amount of time that you are given to spend down that funds if you do end up getting approved. So just do want to share that, because so many people, so many parents, so many families, when we hear the word no, we just go, oh, well, that's it. We can't do anything. And you may hear that from Social Security, and I want you to know to appeal it.
And absolutely. So this is a good start for the advocacy needed. I've known people who have been denied SSI who there's no way in the world they should have been. So that appeal is really important. And this goes through with every other of these services. There are all sorts of appeal rights and things like that that come along, and access isn't always easy. So keep that in mind. And also, ABLE accounts are as simple as starting any other bank account. You just have to, show that your child has that disability determination and go to the state treasurer's office in Kansas, and they have information about that.
This is on the IDD waiver.
Yeah. So the next part of our transition checklist, I'll have Stephanie walk you through, which is the HCBS Intellectual and Developmental Disability Waiver, and it's one of the really important pieces.
So HCBS stands for Home and Community-Based Service Waivers. It is all based off of federal and Medicaid. So all of the waivers are paid for through Medicaid dollars. So when a child is 5, they are able to get on the Intellectual and Developmental Disability Waiver. All of the front doors for that in Kansas are at the local CDDO, or Community Developmental Disability Organizations. Places like Douglas County, Johnson County, Wyandotte County, they have a single county CDDO. Some of the counties out west in Kansas, you might have 10 or 11 counties that feed into a CDDO, but you can go and find the map and find out where your local CDDO is. Mind you, you can get on there at 5. I encourage families 2 things when they get a new diagnosis of autism, especially at the Autism Evaluation Clinic at KU. Sometimes the child is 3. I will tell families at the age of get on your phone, and when they are a month before they turn 5, put on your calendar, call the CDDO and get on here. The reason why we want all of these kids to get on here as soon as possible is because currently there is an 11 to 12-year wait list for services under the Intellectual and Developmental Disability Waiver. The legislature did just approve 500 new slots this year, so that's very exciting for a lot of families. They're finally going to see help, a little bit of respite and help and relief for that. But these are a difficult process. You are going to be asked for the same amount of paperwork. Again, the disability has to be already diagnosed before the age of 22, and they have to have substantial limitations in 3 of the functional areas of life. I don't think we have that list, but there's several. I think there's like 10 different functions that they take a look at.
And so the reason we talk about CDDO is that really is where, as a child, they may have access to respite care or supportive home care. As an adult, that's where people have access to day service supports, supported employment, and residential support. So if a person wants to live in their own apartment as an adult, they would have that staff and the ability to do that through this waiver. That's why it's so important. We also, even though there's a 11 to 12-year waiting list, there is a crisis exception process. So one of the reasons to be on that waiting list, even though it seems like forever, is that if something happens to you and you're on that list, there is a crisis exception to get that child served more immediately. So that's just something, it's an important thing to do. Also, like Social Security, if you have Down syndrome, Fragile X, if you have a significant intellectual disability, for sure you're going to qualify for the HCBS waiver, for IDD waiver. If you don't, and if you have autism and some other intellectual disabilities that may not be as obvious. Sometimes there's some advocacy needed as you apply for that because it's not going to be readily, but it's important to apply for this. The other thing I'll say is that some of our kids with autism seem to be doing okay, keeping up with their peers at age 5. Then they fall a little bit more behind when they're 8, then behind when they're 11, and when they're 15, all of a sudden it appears, gosh, they really have an intellectual disability. We didn't see that before. And so a lot of times there are kids that don't really call the CDDO until they're 15, 16, 17, because you didn't have that evidence that they had an intellectual disability until then.
And that's what I was going to share. It's better to get on at 5, and at 16, when your name finally comes up, you can turn down the services. If you really feel like you no longer need those services, you can turn them down. It's better than waiting until 15, 16, and then, you know, it'll be 27, 28. Unfortunately, as you can see, I hope everyone on here is already on either the waiver or on the wait list, so that they aren't having to wait till their 20s or their 30s to do that. But it is true that a lot of times, a lot of people don't hear about it until they're graduating from high school. So
vocational rehabilitation is another important piece. My son has this job thanks to vocational rehabilitation. And so what VR does is they provide services and supports to help people with disabilities get jobs. So that's anybody with a disability. So a soldier is overseas and is wounded and comes home with a disability, VR helps them get a job. Your child who is born with a disability, VR helps them get a job. And so one of the cool things that VR does is that they do job development. So they have people that have relationships in the community where they can work with employers who they have a long relationship with, and hiring people with disabilities and help provide that. They have some access to trial work periods where an employer can be reimbursed or receive tax breaks for giving your child a chance. There are programs like Project Search that do internships for people with disabilities. Your child can get a job coach. So that's somebody that goes to work with them and helps them learn the job, then checks on them periodically. So my son had a job coach to start his job at the nursing home. That job coach faded, and now about once a month they check in. And what that does is if he's having a hard time learning something new, or there's a new manager or something happens, that job coach can be there to reassure the employer that, look, hey, we've got support for this person. So just because we're running into a hiccup doesn't mean we have to not have this job anymore. We can work, and that's really successful for folks. It can also pay for people seeking college degrees that lead to employment. I knew a young man with autism that wanted to work in a vet's office, and VR paid for him to be go through school to be a veterinary technician to get that certificate, which allowed him to get a really good job in a vet's office doing what he wanted to do to work with animals. They also can assist with transportation and other things to achieve employment goals. So I'll have Stephanie talk about her experience.
Yeah, so talking about paying for degree-seeking college programs, we found out later, my son graduated high school in 2014. We found out about VR. We knew about VR and we knew about the employment side of VR, but we didn't realize that they would pay for college programs and vocational training. So we found that out in 2016, and we applied and went through the process. It was a long and lengthy process because they do want you to try other things sometimes before just saying yes to whatever. And but they did finally approve my son going to school at the University of the Ozarks, and they did pay for that program down there. They have an autism program. You do have to apply for Pell Grants and all that other kind of stuff first, but then anything after that they will support and pay. But they'll pay for vocational training. If somebody wants to go to culinary school at Johnson County Community College, or welding school or something like that, they will pay for that as well. They do assist with transportation. They assist with funds to get a interview, or if you have to pay for a uniform, they can help pay for all of that as well.
So pre-ETS is pre-employment transitional services, and this is relatively new in the last few years. And so what that does is that can do pre-employment preparation for kids who would be VR eligible. So you can't get VR until you're officially out of school. But if you're in school, age 14 to 21, you can access pre-ETS. Pre-ETS has a number of services that they do for kids and they can access. So if they're 14 or over, your 14-year-old could get job exploration counseling. They have service providers that assist with self-advocacy and practicing self-advocacy and making choices about what kind of career that person wants. They do workplace readiness training. They do counseling on comprehensive transition or post-secondary education services. And the best part is they can do work-based learning, which means that your child can do trial work experiences in the community where they'll get paid by pre-ETS to do that work, and the employer doesn't have to pay for them. So they have a real opportunity to spend a few weeks doing a job and having that experience of being paid to do a job with job coaching and all of those kind of supports, which can either lead to a permanent job with that employer or give them that really valuable work experience. One of the best things that happened to my son is he was in an 18 to 21 program in his school district, and throughout those 3 years, they did nothing but job exploration. So they had him going between different employers with job coaches from the school, doing all sorts of different things that he might be interested in. He got to work in a pet store. He got to work in a cafeteria. He did not like that. He got to work and volunteer in nursing homes. And it turned out that he loved working in nursing homes and loved working with that population. And so he had about 4 different nursing homes that he got to volunteer in through his school program to do that job exploration. So when VR came along, vocational rehabilitation came along, and they said, we have relationships with some of these nursing homes. We could get him in to those nursing homes for a paid position. He walked right in, and because he'd been in 3 or 4 different nursing homes, that was old hat to him. He was super familiar. He caught on right away. And I'll tell you, as a parent, the best feeling I've had is in his birthday this March. He came home on his birthday and he had a big birthday card signed by like 25 of his coworkers. And he had a big bag full of goodies that his coworkers had gotten him for his birthday. And that was just the most wonderful thing to see. Yes, he's making money at his job, but he's got that camaraderie and that social connection, which is so important for people's mental health and for people's well-being. And one of the things that helps him is the STEPS program. STEPS is a new program in Kansas, and it is designed to help support people who are on the IDD waiver or other waiting lists or aren't eligible for some of these other processes to keep and maintain jobs. So my son's on the IDD waiver waiting list, so he's actually eligible for STEPS. And what that does for him is it provides him with some hours of staff support. So he can have people coming in and working with him on helping with his laundry, helping him do grocery shopping, helping him get ready to go to work, which is really needed. He doesn't listen to his mom and dad anymore about that he needs to comb his hair and brush his teeth. He will listen to a 20-year-old college student who's coming to work with him. And so that's a huge help. The other really cool thing that STEPS does is they do benefits counseling. So he receives SSI. And there's formulas. It's beneficial to work if you have SSI, but it's helpful to have somebody work with your family to kind of go through all of that. The single best meeting I ever did was with a STEPS benefits counselor to really answer all of my questions. And so I know exactly you know, what the process is for him working, what that looks like for him when he receives his SSI check, et cetera. And been in this field for 30 years, and I get confused by these programs. So having that benefits counseling was really, really helpful. So the next, Stephanie, were you gonna say something?
No, I can talk about guardianship, or if you want to, that's fine.
Oh yeah. I'll have Stephanie talk about guardianship and then take it away.
Okay, so guardianship, I'm sure many of you have heard of guardianship. A lot of the schools, especially in Kansas, tell a lot of parents or scare a lot of parents in saying, oh, your child, son or daughter, is now 18. We don't have to share information with you. You don't have to be invited to the IEP meeting anymore. It's only between us and him or her. That's not true. You do not need guardianship to get this information. Just as a side note, you can just have a release of information and still be provided all of that. Anyways, the numbers in Kansas of high school straight to guardianship have just wildly increased over the last several decades. And advocates are trying to make that change. There's a lot of alternatives to guardianship. Full disclosure, I was one of those parents that got scared into getting guardianship. I went and got guardianship. And I've always practiced supported decision-making and advocacy with my son, Matthew. So I never really needed it, but I didn't know any better. So I went and I received guardianship. Throughout that time, I realized he didn't need guardianship, and everybody told me the stories of, oh, it's so hard to get guardianship removed once you've gotten it in place. How do you go back to the courts and say, you know, you've gone to the courts once and said they are incapable of making any decisions on their own. I need to be a guardian and only I can make decisions for my child. So once you say that to the court, it's really hard to go back and make those changes. So I decided that once we got through college, we were going to do that. And we did go back to the courts last June, and we showed how successful he was in college, and not just education-wise, but he found his village there. He found his supports. Yes, he still texted back home and asked a lot of questions and looking for supports, but at the same time, he found people there that could help and support him in making decisions and right decisions, good decisions. So I was able to set it all up, and long story short, the judge agreed when we went in June and did have guardianship removed for my son. So I share this story with like all these people I know, and they're like, that's a unicorn decision, because it's not that easy. So really excited about that. But alternatives to guardianship. So I like to talk to families about alternatives to guardianship before. What does it hurt to, oh, no, go back, Sean, sorry. What does it matter whether you do guardianship right at 18 or maybe at age 20, 21, if they really, really need it? Try using other opportunities as well. Use supported decision.
Well, I think Stephanie froze.
Yes, I was just about to say the same thing.
So I'll take over. So when you turn,
you know,
okay.
all of those decisions. Is it my? Can you hear me, Sean?
You froze.
Am I having trouble?
You froze.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. You know, we all need support when making decisions. And a lot of times, if you are helping your child make those decisions throughout life, starting when they're really little, and you ask them, do they want to watch Winnie the Pooh or Mickey Mouse? Those are all helping in learning supported decision makings. Sometimes with supported decisions, you can use power of attorney. You can use releases of information. You can use there's power of attorneys for financial, there's power of attorneys for medical. So there's different areas. Supported decision making, as you can see, there's an asterisk there. In the Kansas legislature for the last 3 legislation sessions, so for the last 6 years, we have been trying to get supported decision-making recognized in the state of Kansas so that when a family goes to court and say, we want guardianship, the judge will talk about supported decision-making first before automatically going to guardianship. However, that has still yet to pass the legislature, so we will see it hopefully again introduced again in the next legislative session in 2025. But as you can see here too, when you're talking about supported decision making, it may not just be your immediate family that supports you. It could be friends, it could be distance, it could be a mentor. So many people definitely build around to bring that village and help support, just like you and I in those decisions. Go to the next.
So one of the reasons we talk about guardianship is that it's the most restrictive tool you can use. And as Stephanie's experience illustrates, you know, if you tell the state your child needs a guardian and something happens to you, they're going to assume they still need a guardian. So unless you have a successor plan, really well delineated legally, the state can appoint anybody to be your child's guardian. And that gives them all sorts of power to restrict them. And there are so many other tools like those powers of attorney, limited guardianships, durable powers for healthcare that are much less restrictive and certainly much less permanent. One of the things about Kansas is that we are one of the worst states for guardianships. About 75% of people with IDD in Kansas have a guardian. There are other states where it's more like 30 to 35%, and there's no difference demographically between the states in terms of the disabilities. It's simply that Kansas has had a practice of granting way too many guardianships. So that's not to say there aren't some families that's a choice they probably need to make. But before you, at age 18, run off and spend $3,000 to get a guardian, think about some of these other options. Also, your child does not turn into a pumpkin at age 18 if they don't have a guardian. So for the most part, you know, all the things that they've always done, you can still be a part of. They just need to sign a release of information for you to be there. So unless there's a conflict or some reason that wouldn't happen, you can still be involved in your child's life and you can support their decision making on a number of instances. So just want to encourage, that's one thought process to go through as we're talking about guardianship. And so I'm going to go through here. So when we talk about supported decision making and all of this, what are we trying to get to? We're really trying to get to self-determination, which really means it's a person's ability to be causal agents and actors in their own life. And so when we talk about benefits of self-determination, this is research tested, this is evidence-based. There's all sorts of studies that show that when people are more self-determined, and we have some measures to measure how self-determined a person is, we know that they're more likely to live independently. We know they're more likely to be employed, to be integrated in their communities, to be happier, and even more important, to be able to recognize and avoid abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So all of these self-determination things that we talk about helping people practice choices, be a part of their community, explore jobs, all of these things really lead to that self-determined life that we know helps people be the best they can. So thinking about, you know, all of us have a self-determination journey, whether we have a disability or not. So if you're a person without disability, how did you develop your short and long-term goals? Identify your opportunities. How did you fill out your first college application or job application? How did you write your first resume? How did you get a job? Almost all of us have done all of these things with support from our family and our friends and our community. We've had our mom or dad help us fill out our first job application. We have had a friend who's a really good, back in the old days, typist, and now really good to help us design our resume. We've all done this through support. And the most important thing with developing short and long-term goals is we've all done this through our experiences. We've all had the opportunity to fail and how to figure out what works for us and what doesn't. So components of self-determination, that's so important to play into this transition process. Opportunities for choice making, decision making, and problem solving. The example we give there is that if a 20-year-old has their first job at a grocery store and they've never had opportunities to make choices or to make their own decisions, and they're told to stock this shelf, and what they're supposed to stock doesn't fit on the shelf, that's the biggest problem they've ever had to solve. They're not going to succeed in their employment. People need opportunities for real choice making and real decision making and real problem solving before they start looking at this job exploration. Self-advocacy is a part of self-determination, which is being able to advocate for yourself. That's really hard. It's hard for adults who don't have disabilities. It's hard for parents who are trying to advocate for their kids with disabilities. Self-advocacy is really hard. It's hard to know when do I become more assertive with a situation? When do I have the patience to hope people are hearing me and helping things work out? Those are some really refined skills that only happen when people have an opportunity to practice self-advocacy, to practice the kind of things that all of us do, which is self-observation, evaluation, and reinforcement. And it's also what you see in growth for our kids who are transition age, is this increased self-awareness and self-knowledge. I will tell you that my son at age 14, when we kind of start transition, was very different than he is at 23. I would never have imagined him working 20 hours a week with not a lot of job coaching support and being successful in employment based on who he was at 14. It was all those experiences between 14 and 23 that led to all of those things. And Stephanie, I think you can talk about Matthew's experience there too, the growth that you've seen with him.
The growth I've seen with him it's just like everybody else, it's when you think about milestones and you think about changes and whatnot, it's like one day it's not there and then one day it is, and you're like, where did this come from? How did this happen? And you're excited about this situation and happy about it as well. As I said, when he went away to college, he got the chance to live independently in a dorm while he was still supported and finding all those things. And he was able to make those decisions and advocate for himself. Some of those decisions weren't always great. He definitely got those freshman to senior 30, 40 pounds, but he still made good decisions and he graduated college.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I went the wrong way.
I was gonna say that went backwards.
Yeah. So really, I want to respond. One of the people in chat said they're really overwhelmed by all of this. Absolutely. My wife's a special education teacher. I've been in this field for 30 years. I'm overwhelmed. We're both overwhelmed by the decisions and by all the systems. I thought I knew something about some of these systems, but until you actually experience it, there's a huge learning curve, and it's very overwhelming and does take a lot of time. It's almost like a second job when your child is transitioning and you start having to deal with Social Security and the CDO and VR and all of these other opportunities for them. It is like a second job. It is a busier time than maybe high school was for a lot of kids. And so I just want to assure it is overwhelming for everybody. Some of that is because some of these systems are designed to be hard to get into on purpose. Some of it is because some of the systems at the state level don't work the way the book says they should work. And so and especially between rural and urban. So I just want to assure everybody that it is overwhelming and you are not doing anything wrong to feel overwhelmed.
And I will also encourage you, like, this experience, this journey has taught me more advocacy skills than I ever wanted to have. I mean, I always had them as a young child. You know, my parents said I was strong-headed and stubborn and wanting to get my way all the time anyway. So that kind of helped with the advocacy skills that I had to do. But I want to let everybody know, before high school, before I ended up with guardianship, I always felt like we were behind the 8 ball. We were always finding out, like I said, we found out 2 years after the fact that VR helps pay for college. We found out about the IDD wait list as I'm sitting here trying to tell everybody, you know, before the age of 5, get on that. I didn't find out about the IDD wait list until I was, and this is a personal story, but I was seeing a therapist myself at Johnson County Mental Health, and they're the ones who told me about the wait list. Nobody from the school, nobody from the doctor's office, nobody told me that. And so, like, I constantly was struggling and frustrated with being behind the 8 ball on everything that my son needed. And, you know, it ended up making me change my careers from being in the corporate world to being where I am today and helping get this information out so more families don't have the roadblocks and the frustrations and behind the 8 ball as I was. As Sean mentioned in here too, that, you know, he's been in this stuff for 30 years and he still gets it. So it makes me feel a little better knowing that I've only been in this industry about, well, 2016, 8 or 9 years now. And struggling and finding that out. One of the things I will share too is, like, when you know in your gut your child can do something, and I have to check myself. I have asked my friends a lot of times, like, am I being realistic? When Matthew was in college, am I being realistic? Can he actually do the work? He could. I was just having a moment. But if you really believe your child can do something, or your child has a right to something like vocational rehabilitation services or Social Security or whatever it is, don't give up. Keep advocating, keep sharing, keep telling your story, keep knocking on a different door to make sure that he or she gets what they need.
Yeah, and I'll just say, again, everybody feels like they're behind the 8 ball. I'm sitting here looking at my son's work stubs that I have to print out and send into Social Security that I'm a month behind on. So all of us feel overwhelmed by this. Also, as somebody said in chat, they did a link to any information regarding VR. Really the first step is calling vocational rehabilitation and making that application and getting that case open and having that conversation with a VR counselor about what VR can do for you, because they really should be able to talk with you about all of the options, whether it's a combination of job development, job coaching, paying for parts of college. All of that can happen, but it's important to start that conversation. And then I say that positively, and then negatively, I will say then that's where the advocacy will need to begin, because it does take advocacy. One of the hardest things, I know lots of parents, one of the hardest things are that when we've been through special education and we've worked really hard to advocate for our kids throughout special education through age 21, one of the hardest things is realizing that we're still advocating when they're out of special education with all of these systems. And it's really continues to be a challenge. And it's also okay, because you've been advocating for your child for 20 years, to feel tired sometimes and feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go through this again. By now I have my advocacy spiel for my son in different systems. I'm tired of having to advocate all the time. and he's a great self-advocate in a lot of ways, but the system stuff, I'm the one dealing with them and my wife's the one dealing with them. So
And it's okay to recognize that you are tired and to take a break. And, obviously I wouldn't say take too long of a break, but, take a couple of days.
So the thing that I will also urge, we don't have these self-care slides on here. But you can't take care of your other people unless you take care of yourself. So
Just like on an airplane.
So you really do need to do a couple things. Give yourself grace, because it's a learning curve for all of us, and we all forget things or don't do things right or feel like we haven't done something we should. And it's also okay to take a break, to know I need to recharge and to attack this in 6 months, because I don't have it in me to fill out another dang piece of paper for Social Security or to tackle this. So give yourself that grace and give yourself permission to not have done it perfectly every time, because I promise you, these systems, there is absolutely no way to do it perfectly. They make it so complicated and so hard, and there are so many
Try to
unforeseen
wear us down.
roadblocks. You're gonna mess something up at some point, and it's okay. And we just get right back on and we try it again. The other thing I'll urge is there's all sorts of places to get assistance. And so we have our Kansas Family Support Center, which you have links to, and you have Stephanie and I's emails. There are a lot of other organizations like Families Together that do wonderful work and that are also fantastic resources, especially like Families Together for transition advocacy within the schools for the IEP process. So there are all sorts of help out there, and you're very free to email Stephanie or I, or contact the Kansas Family Support Center, and we're very happy to work with you. Okay, there's a person that says my daughter's 11, is on the IDD waiting list, and just got a special needs trust. Awesome. What's the next step you should be working on? If you're not going to go ahead.
No, go ahead, and then I'll share what my thoughts are.
So if you're not going to be Social Security eligible because of family income, you are way ahead of the game. That special needs trust is really important. We didn't touch on that at all, but it's really important. So that's the best thing. The other thing is that as you're starting to approach middle school and transition age, it's not too soon to start looking at the IEP and to start looking at what are the goals on the IEP that actually relate to preparation for employment or preparation for work, or some of those kind of skills, whether it's self-determination skills that we talked about, whether it's having the opportunity to practice some things that might be good employment skills, all of those things. It's not too soon to start thinking about what that looks like on the IEP. It doesn't all have to be reading levels and math skills.
And that's exactly what I was going to talk about, and start looking at, cultivating her her hobby. What does she really like to do, and start cultivating those kinds of things too. Like, if she likes animals, does she want to go and, you all volunteer at a farm or a vet office or something like that? If she likes to be outside, finding those areas and giving her chores around those areas that she likes to do, and maybe find different volunteer opportunities within the community around those things, so that you're cultivating those ideas that can lead to employment in those areas at some point.
So somebody said, this may be a bit out of the transition context, but have anybody had any luck getting school supports like paras for high school extracurriculars like sports?
I have not.
That's a tricky one.
I know that they can get paras at Special Olympics,
Mhm.
that they do have some supports through that way. And I do want to share, Special Olympics is not just all about sports. When I share this with families and talk about the first thing is, oh, my child isn't coordinated, doesn't like sports, doesn't want to do anything team, doesn't want to do anything. a lot of times now Special Olympics goes way beyond sports and does a lot of social skill type events as well. So take a look into that. I know for the older groups, and my son is involved in Blue Valley Special Olympics, they do dances, they do going out to see a dinner and a movie, they go and rent a bus to go tour the Christmas lights during the Christmas season, holiday season. So there's all kinds of things beyond just sports now.
So the other thing I'll say about the paras for extracurriculars, the one way you can get that is that somehow you create an IEP goal that's tied to, you know, that child's future education. So sometimes if it's a part of an IEP goal, and the way to achieve that, let's say, speech goal for IEP would be to participate in some sort of club or extracurricular. Sometimes you might be able to get a para for that, but again, they're not necessarily required to do that. The other thing I will just lean on, especially at high school, is natural supports. A lot of high schools have classes where they have
Peer
peer
support.
supports, work with students in special education, and those peer supporters' job is to do stuff with kids even outside the school day, and they get credit for doing that. So I would investigate if your high school has something like that, and that might be an opportunity to have them have a natural support at something like that.
And
Gonna
we
be-
did just get a comment. Oh, sorry. One more thing. We did get a comment about charting the life course. We could do another event on charting the life course. It is something that was developed by our friends across the state line at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And yes, Family Together has some information. I happen to be an ambassador around charting the life course. So if anybody has any specific questions around charting the life course, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to chat about it. To me, charting the life course is kind of like looking at where all those supports come from and kind of where your child wants to go in life as well, like what I was talking about earlier. And I think we're kind of out of time. I think Raneem's going to come on here and tell us we are out of time for tonight.